Hey, now yes, I am back and I've been playing with the Polyend Tracker and I've been wanting to get something like this underway for a very long time, so something been in the making for a while. So if you just want to grab the patches, definitely click the link below and they'll take you straight to them. But I think a lot of this has sort of stemmed from when I first came into trackers. Like I started with LSDJ, which is a really cool tracker on a Game Boy, but it has its own synth engine and we can, like, it does have samples as well. But when you come into like a pure sample-based workflow, you really come into it and it's like, I want you to make sound, but really once you start getting those sample libraries and then start learning how the sample engine works and you start mangling those samples, you really see the potential of what can happen. So something I haven't really touched on is the wavetables and the instruments. Because of 1.6, we were able to save out our instruments. Before we would have to do the same thing over and over again, but with our 1.6 we can save out those instruments and bring them straight back in with all those settings ready to go. So really good time to sort of play with wavetables, play with FM. Like I've got my Digitone over there, which was really helpful in this. And yeah, it's like I can use these as to make a track like I just did, or I can actually plan for adding FM to my sound. So I can pull in one of these FM sounds, program it in on the Polyend Tracker, and then when I get into my studio space here, I can turn that into MIDI information and fire it into my setup here. So I can have the Digitone playing alongside the Polyend Tracker. So let's do a bit more explanation, because I think how I made these sounds is going to be really important as well as going over some of the cool things I found out. So here's the Digitone. It's one of my favorite FM synths, a little groove box. I really enjoy the sound. So all the sounds came from this machine, but instead of going through and then like manually creating the sounds through the system, what I did was I actually connected it up via Overbridge. And here is Overbridge, and this is the way I've been manipulating the sound. So I'd come in here and create a really cool shape using the LFOs and that, and it's just easier to work with one screen and make tweaks instead of being over on the Digitone over here and then being able to tweak that. Like with Wavetable synthesis, you want to try and capture a single cycle, so no detuning or anything. And I found F0 in MIDI, and I do use Reaper for sound design. I find it really useful with some of the tools in there, and then I would record it out. So I have one MIDI bar. Sometimes I'll come into here and start tweaking some of these settings, so I could create like a we'll play with that, and then I got a filter track which I can animate, like create something like that and add to the sound. So, and then what happened was I sat down and had a big session about creating a whole bunch of different sounds, because this is a part I struggled with wavetable synthesis, was trying to find a piece of software that was accessible enough, not very programmatic, but I could get in there and convert something like this into a wavetable. And this is where I found out about Vital. Now Vital is a VST that's freely accessible. It doesn't come with like any wavetables itself, unless you pay with it and then you get patches and that. But yeah, it adds a way that we can create wavetable synthesis, and I will put a link down below so you can get down to this page here. And I would recommend picking it up because it just made everything so much easier, because all I needed to do was I could grab a sound file, I can drag it in here. These do different things, but I like to drag it into Wavetable. Sounds a bit wonky, but what we can do is we can set the phase to clear and then file blend and get rid of that clickiness for us. And then what we can do here, if you ever dealt with any sort of animation suite, I do a lot of Blender, so this was really easy for me to understand. We've got two keyframes, the start and the end point, and then I can manipulate the settings here. So I'm just going to pull that to where I see some waveforms going, and we'll go to the end point and we'll go back to see something happen. Now if I scrub through here, we can see the waveform changing for us. And then if we come back, close this one, we can say the waveform here, and I'm just going, that sounds kind of interesting. And all I need to do was go, I can save it to Vital itself to create a really interesting wavetable for myself, but go back into edit mode, hit this hamburger up here, and then we can export a WAV file. And that's how I was able to create the first pass of this workflow, was getting a whole bunch of FM wavetables ready to go so I could start creating my patches. So after my session with the Digitone to create those wavetables, I could finally load them onto the Polyend Tracker, and then it becomes the point where I go through the tracker workflow and the instrument parameters to create some really cool sounds. Alright, now to the fun stuff. Really what was happening was I was going into the sample loader and grabbing these samples, so I just had them all set as wavetables, and I would just bring them in on the end. So what I'll do is I'll create these projects, just exploring with the sound. So if I was to bring in, say, this one, all of them are about 4%. So I tried to keep them as high fidelity and optimized as possible. Now I'm finding I can get about 22 of these into a song. We have the sound, and then what we can do is go into the editor and set it to wavetables. And what I found is setting it to 124 with these ones helped out a lot. Now, it was getting a bit frustrating at first to just go in this workflow. So what I did instead, so if I just go back, go to instruments and go to template. So these are all the instruments. I create all these PTI files that have the wavetable already set up with just a bit of a wiggle with the LFO. So if I add one of them in, yep, and we're going to play it and have a look. Whoops. So yeah, it just does a bit of a wiggle, and then I can find the sound I want and go from there. I can start editing. And there was a few things that I really enjoyed about having the wavetables. So when I started working with wavetables, I found it acted a lot more lively. It wasn't just some static sound that was just playing in the background, and like you could hear it repeating. Like you could create these weird offsets. Like right now, I think it's on 4. So if we go down to wavetable, 12 steps, over 12 steps it would happen. But what I could do is start chaining up different LFO amounts with the different elements. So cutoff and wavetable actually work really well. And you create like an offset. So this would be on 12 and this would be on 8. And then there'll be like a full, like, I think it's like 30 or 40 plus where the whole thing is just oscillating and moving. And you can't really tell that it's just one sample. It was really cool. Another thing I've found really interesting was locking the LFOs between the wavetable and the cutoff, which made a lot of these sort of like harsh, anything that's like wub or wub dub, like this one. This one's a quite brighter one, but some of them are a little bit less. But what I would do is lock these two together and then have different amounts, and that creates some really interesting sounds. Like they're not just wubby or dubby sounds like I do, like playing with bass lines and that sort of sound, but having that sort of lock between them creates some really interesting types as well. And yeah, really what I'll do, I'll try and give it a descriptor where I think it felt nice. So it's like some of these are bass sounds. The preview is a little bit hard, but and yeah, I'll just load in each one of the waveforms in a few times and then manipulate in different ways I felt that would help. So a bit about naming. So I did break it up into different areas. So where I felt they were more suited for basses, where they're more suited for FX or keys or leads. But I found playing with the sound and moving the octaves up and down, they sort of had different elements that they could offer just when you start shaping it with the LFO. A bass line that has a lot of low end might turn into a very soft high end piece. So do that. A little bit more descriptor names. So when I'm dealing with the Digitone, you have these sort of descriptor names that will allow you to sort of isolate a sound. So if you're wanting like a kick drum that's really harsh, you could find it that way. And this way, when I go into one of these, it sort of categorizes these sounds together. So really handy to have, and that lovely auto name feature on here. And then I'll add the number of the wavetable that I use for that one. So if I go back into the wavetables, 29, if I jump down here and go down to 29, I can do that. But there's some cool things that we can do, because we're not just limited to, like, say if I copy this wavetable and paste him here and say that's using 30 and we've got that sound. What happens if I use, say, 26 and I'm just going to add next? They'll put it over the top. And what it's done is it's kept all the instrument parameters of that sound, but it's just replaced the waveform. So if we listen to that now, we've got a different sound again. So it's like you can overlay on top of all these patches that were brought in. Once I had my instruments done, and I really enjoyed that part, but I wanted to create a bit more of a fuller scape sound because I wanted to capture FM itself, and something I like doing is a bit of FM drums, especially on the Digitone. And this is where coming in and recording a whole bunch of drum sounds. So similar to the wavetables, I created a MIDI instrument that would fire off and tell the Digitone to play a sound. Then using the modifiers here, I could connect it up to a whole bunch of different parameters. But this time I was using LFOs to be able to control what's going on, because I've got the settings tweaked right about on point. Like I created some template files in here, and then what I would do is I'll create the right sort of range I want. So this is going a bit into that parametric sound design, and it's really good for getting a whole bunch of different sounds and then picking out the sounds that you really like, delete the rest, tweak the settings again and create another batch, and you keep doing that until you get like a really nice library together. I think there's a video by itself for that one, so let me know down in the comments if you want me to create something like that. But yeah, I was able to go through, create all these drum tones, and this is another thing I really like Reaper for. So I've gone through and named each one of these items, so when it comes to rendering it out, I can create a little command using some of the functionality in here, and then what that will do for me is I can sort them out into all the files that I need to and have all the drums numbered. So it just made it really easy on that export and management of the files. And because it's the Polyend Tracker, and I did do a tutorial on making drum kits with the Polyend Tracker, and I'll leave a link up above, but this is the same process. I created some MIDI information to play each of those samples, and what I've done is I've gone into EXO, and then what I could do was isolate my drum samples. So these are all the drum samples I made, they're all connected, and then I can augment the sound in here. And then what I'll do is I'll record out a drum kit in here. There might be a few samples that I don't think work well together, so I'll tweak it about, and then I'll go about making individual drum kits. And then all these went back on the tracker, and then I did the editing to make the drum kit instrument. So now there's a few sticklers that I found with this thing. Like right now, if I'm listening to the instruments in this side, I got a really clear sense, but on this side, the drum kits, it sort of works because I can preview the sound before getting into it, but it is just playing the sample or the waveform. So if I'm trying to get a sense of what's going on, like if I'll just delete that one, yes, and bring this one over the top. That's what it thinks it is, but that's what's actually happening. That was one thing. Another feature I would have loved to see is some way to export here into a sample file, because when I created the original sound, so if I go back to the template files, I created this template project first. So there's quite a lot of these projects that are numbered, so I could find them again. And then in that template project, I'll take out all the instruments and put it into a file on the SD card, come back into the Polyend Tracker, put these into the parameters again, start making my patches, and then I'll take the instruments out of those patches projects and put them back into the actual sounds that I wanted. So it was a bit involved to get to this point, but I'm glad I did it because now I've got a whole bunch of FM based stuff. And as because I wanted to create a sample pack that was for the Polyend Tracker as well as the Polyend Play, even though I don't have one, I think adding FM to the Polyend Play would really amp up that device. So what I did is I went through every single track or project that I made with all those instruments, lined them up, and created a sound file that had all the samples in there, so I could bring them back into Reaper and cut out the sounds, just do a bit of tweaking to make sure they don't clip at the end or the start, or have a nice little fade out. Quite short, just to keep it small size, so you can use the instrument which is a little bit bigger, or you can use the sample which is a little bit smaller. But then this is where I would have loved a bake instrument to sample, because I manually had to go through and rename every one of these samples to match the instrument, and as you could probably tell, there's quite a lot of them. So But I'm glad I did it because now there is a really nice sample library to accompany the instrument. So if you want to go down a sample workflow and mangle one of these up, you can definitely do that, or you can bring in the instrument and start tweaking to get the sound you want. And I found that really useful. All right, so now it was the fun part. I got to make a little bit of a ditty that accompanied to promote what I just did. And yeah, it was really interesting, like being able to bring in a drum kit and then start layering different sound effects on there. So I think I had 3 sound effects and I had a really cool idea underway. And really it was just start fleshing out through my pipeline. So if you haven't seen any of my tutorials, I sort of go through how to go about making a song on the Polyend Tracker. So definitely stick around for them. And yeah, got the song done. I made a bit more of an extended version after making the introduction ditty. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And yeah, being able to sample a sound, like it was a bit more, I had to make the melody line and then start pulling in the patches to see which one's going to sound the best, or pulling in the instrument and then bring it across. But I found after a while, once I sort of got into the workflow, it's like, oh, I need some sort of key sound. I could go quickly grab it. Or if I need some bass sound or some FX, and as you can see, there's a few of the different types through here. A lot of the bass sounds, because yeah, I do like having those melody lines. And yeah, having access to it, start playing with it. I didn't use too many position commands in this one, but it was really nice to be able to manipulate the instrument in the actual tracker workflow. Yes, I'm putting this tracker file with the project so you can get access to it and have a look at some of the cool things I did, like making like a sample based rumble on a like techno track and all that, so you can have a look. And yeah, I'll put some of the samples there as well, so definitely check it out. So I hope this has helped you out, because I'm really enjoying having a library like this. Just having all those FM wavetables ready to go, as well as all those patches I create, I can just grab a sound that I'm thinking, throw it on the machine, manipulate a little bit, and I can get 90% the way there and capturing that sort of FM aesthetic. So sitting down and creating the wavetables and going through that entire process to create a library of sounds that I can work with, definitely worthwhile. And I'm definitely thinking about all these other machines and different genres as well. So it was a really cool process to go through, and I'm great that I got something out from it into all you. So yeah, if you did enjoy this one and you want to support what I'm doing, definitely click the link below. And yeah, if you think this one's earned a like, definitely give it that thumbs up, because it tells the algorithm to point this to other people. So yeah, I hope you found this one useful in some way, and I look forward to seeing you next time.